Hello and welcome to episode number 3 of Let's Talk Design. Duncan asks, what's the most challenging logo you ever had to create? So I think designing for yourself is really tricky, and probably the hardest logo I had to create was the No Divide one, which I've got there. I don't know if you can really see that, but it's basically, he's called Marvin and he's our ox, and we had a story in mind for No Divide when we established the name. The story comes from the fable about the lion and the oxen, and he had this great story, but we didn't really have an idea of what the ox would actually look like, and we wanted to keep it really simple. We wanted it to be something that stood out. And now my illustrator skills aren't that great, so for me it was starting to look at photos of oxen and then try and recreate something in Illustrator, and it was really challenging, but I'm really pleased with how it turned out. Isaac asks, how do you find companies or people who need a new website, and how do you approach them? Do I call them, do I email them, or do I meet them in person? So Isaac, personally I find cold calling one of those really awkward, cringy things that I just don't want to do really. So I'd say the first thing to do is probably to drop them an email. You can introduce yourself, you can perhaps send over a bit of information about the company and what it is that you can offer them, and then if they respond to you, great, and you can follow up with a phone call. But also, if they don't, then don't be too disheartened and perhaps follow up with a second email. And if they just blanket ignore you, then perhaps just call it a day. But hopefully, they will get back to you, and at that point you can arrange a Skype call or get in touch with them on the phone, and from there definitely meet them in person if you can, because there's nothing like a face-to-face meeting. However, that might not always be possible, so Skype is a really good alternative. Matt asks, I would like to enter some work into design awards. Apart from the big ones, D, A and D, etc., can you recommend any? Or any good sites for regular design competitions? So Matt, if you're looking at entering into design competitions, then there's two that kind of spring to mind. Awards with like 3 W's in the URL, and the FWA. Now they're both like really well recognized, and you can submit your work to them. However, the thing to bear in mind is that we're not designing for awards, and we're designing for clients. So just bear that in mind and don't become too focused on the award side. Jordan asks, what are your go-to resources when seeking inspiration or guidance for your designs? So Jordan, there's a really good site that launched recently called Call to Idea, and I'll put the URL in the description. It's a really good site because what it does is it focuses on elements of design rather than like the design as a whole. And for me, that's really important because when I'm looking for inspiration, I'm generally looking to see how people solve different problems. So perhaps that's like how they solve like a modal profile view or a form style or something like that, and it just amalgamates all these great little elements into one site. And you can also just use Dribble for the same way. You can search on Dribble for various tags, and just perhaps looking through sites like Site Inspire, but instead of looking at the design as a whole and just gaining inspiration from the whole site, just taking small elements and seeing how they solve those problems. I think that's kind of where I get inspiration for certain elements of design. Zach asks, how do you approach your art projects and what gain do you feel they have overall? So yeah, I do a few sort of like doodles and things on the side, and sometimes I put them out in public, and sometimes I don't, and they just sit in my sketchbook. But for me, they're a really good way to get out ideas or things you've been thinking about. Sometimes getting out a pen and pencil is a really good way to get inspiration for new work. So for me, I feel like I gain a lot of new ideas from them, and maybe techniques that I wouldn't perhaps just try out when I'm working in Photoshop. So I find they're really valuable for that. If you're looking to how you can actually approach art projects, then, or side doodles, I don't know what you'd call them, but then I would suggest just to literally get pens, paper, paint and everything, ink, and just start drawing stuff and making stuff. So for me, it's just kind of like going back to my graphic design roots, of just doing sort of real material work, and I find that really interesting. So I would just approach them in the same way you'd approach art projects at school really. Just no brief, no sort of idea of generally what you're aiming to achieve, just do something and do it for fun. Joe asks, I'm working more on dashboards for clients and still haven't found a nice way to handle responsive web design tables. Any tips? Hey Joe, yeah, this is a really tricky one. Responsive design tables are something that create problems for us all the time. There isn't really a one shoe fits all. Obviously it depends what kind of data you are trying to fit into these tables. However, there's a really good article that Matt, the developer at NoDivide, sent me, which is on CSS tricks, and it's a few years old now, but it's actually got the underlying principles that we still use today. And a site we launched last week, Charity Bank, they have savings products, and on there we have some responsive design tables. So go and have a look at that and see how we did that, and definitely check out the article on CSS tricks. So that's it for this week. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, then please consider giving a comment or sending me a tweet and letting me know what you thought of the episode. So somebody wrote into me last week with a new idea for the show, which I think is really great. So what we're going to do at the end of every episode is I'm going to ask you guys a question, and I want you to answer it in the comments below. So this week's question is, what's been your favourite side project and why? And remember, I still need questions for the show, and if you're unsure how to do that, then we're going to show you now.